Hey everyone, welcome to Daily Revelations. So today we're going to talk about wisdom. And the next days, today and tomorrow, I'm in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, which are books written by Solomon, who was considered have been given an incredible gift of wisdom from God. And so, rightfully so, he is sharing about wisdom in these books. And so what do we have to learn about being wise and gaining wisdom about wisdom? And it's interesting as I'm going to take you through Proverbs 1, 7, and 8. And they have a flow to them that was really interesting. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today. We're going to cover the what, the how, the why, and back to what, but also who in all of this to give you the understanding that God shared with me this morning. So, and that's what we're doing. I'm just sharing with you what God has revealed to me. And doesn't mean that I'm any more wise than you are. I'm just sitting and listening. And that's a lot of what this talks about is our willingness to follow wisdom versus what we naturally follow, which is not wisdom. It's foolishness. So what is wisdom, first of all? And if we dive into the very first 6 verses of Proverbs 1, it says wisdom is knowing, it's gaining instruction, it's learning to discern, it's behaving wisely, so it's the applied version of knowing, which includes righteousness, justice, and equality, but based on God's view of those, not ours. It's prudent acts. It's learning continually. It's not something we gain and then all of a sudden we go, I'm wise, and we're off. This is a process. And finally, it's growing in understanding. So taking those bits and building them upon one another, flourishing and using it. And that's how we gain more knowledge. So that is the what of us, not the what of God, but the what of us for that. Now we go into the how. How we move to Proverbs 7 for just a little while. We'll come back to 1 in a little bit. But how we do that in Proverbs 7 says that we are diligent, consistently keeping within the lessons of truth, applying boundaries to our lives, treasuring what's inside those boundaries, not what's outside those boundaries, focusing on developing a love for what's inside those boundaries, not continually looking out and saying, oh, but I love that as well. It's pulling ourselves back into that. Another how is attaching it to ourselves, almost to the point that we tether ourselves in the middle of that boundary to God so that we aren't pulled. And when we are pulled, our tether stops us. And also making it part of us, marking ourselves also with it, saying, this is my land, this is the wisdom I live in, and this is not, so that we remember by our marking. People who have tattoos, they see them all the time. And are you marked in your heart, especially with what God is saying you are versus what's outside those boundaries that the world says you are. You relate to it. You make it as part of your family, actually. That's what Proverbs 7 says. And you use it as a shield. Those are the hows of what we do to stay within the boundaries of wisdom. But why? Now let's move on to that. The why is because what's outside the boundaries of God is rather enticing. Actually, Proverbs 7 relates evil to a seductress who is cunning, boisterous, rebellious, lurking, always waiting for us, groping to seize us, seeking earnestly with evil intentions, persuasive and flattering. But in the end, verse 23 of Proverbs 7 says, it is a snare. A snare that if we don't turn aside from, in verse 25, that we won't be led to life. Instead, we will choose our own destruction. That's what verse 27 says. So now I'm going to go back to Proverbs 1, because this continues the why. The why in verse 7 of Proverbs 1 says is a choice. And if you're realizing the boundaries that I was just talking about in the how, we have a choice to stay in them or we have a choice to leave them. But what God calls the choice to stay in them is when we fear the Lord. That's what the fear of the Lord really is. It's that boundary living, that living and pursuing God. The other choice is what God calls foolishness. And that is running the other way, pushing ourselves outside of his boundaries so we can do everything that's outside of that and not living in that contained space. In Proverbs 1, verses 20 and 21, it actually says that wisdom is shouting at us. But then again, the world is shouting too, and it's shouting very loud. Who are we listening to? In the end, it can lead to our destruction, which Proverbs 1 also says, as well as Proverbs 7. But there's something very beautiful at the end of Proverbs 1. And it says, but if you listen to wisdom, these are the two promises. You will live securely. That means you will live in a protection that God has. Within those boundaries, God has like this bubble of protection for us. But when we go outside, that doesn't exist. God cannot protect us when we choose not to follow him. And the other thing is we live in a state of ease. Ease not in as we relate it to. We can read that and say, oh, my life will be easy. No, it'll be at ease from evil. That means evil can't touch us. And that ease of being freed from all the snares and the ugliness that comes with evil can't be part of our lives. Yes, there are a lot of other things that can be part of our lives, but those things that we can get ourselves into don't exist when we don't allow ourselves beyond those boundaries. We avoid those traps, those snares, because the snares only exist outside those walls. And that's why we need to seek wisdom. So now we're going to Proverbs 8. And this is the what on God's side. Not the what about us, but the what about what God does when we choose wisdom. Living in this clear set of boundaries, this box of life. It is the gate to God's kingdom. That's what verses 1 through 13 say in Proverbs 8. It is also the avenue to true power. That's what verses 14 through 16 say. It is the path to true wealth. Kingdom wealth dwells within this space. That's what verses 17 through 21 say. And this is the most beautiful part of Proverbs 8. It says, wisdom is revealed as it has been from the beginning by God's Spirit, who is always rejoicing before God and always delighting in his ways. It is this kingdom party that God desires for us to be part of. And that's what verses 22 through 31 say. And finally, wisdom is the path to blessings, life, and favor. That's what verses 32 through 35 say. And then it comes with the final warning. But not following wisdom, we choose to injure ourselves. It's like a version, actually Proverbs 8 says, of self-hate. We hate ourselves when we do not allow ourselves to be disciplined within God's wisdom. And in the end, it shows that we love death more than we love God. So, sorry, this has been a long one. I took you through 3 different chapters, but but so rich, so beautiful. So I hope that you have learned something new about wisdom and that you apply it and you realize the reason we need to pursue God and pursue his wisdom more than anything else, because that is where life truly is, in God's presence. So have an awesome day, and I'll see you again tomorrow, everybody, on Daily Revelations.